Beneath the burning sky, where the horizon bled into the endless plains, silence carried heavier than thunder. The wind swept through the tall grass with a voice of its own, whispering of stories long buried under dust and blood. Travelers spoke of this land as a place where spirits lingered, where the earth remembered every step and every cry, and where the old ways still held power strong enough to bend the fate of men and women alike. It was a land of endless struggle, yet one that breathed with beauty so wild it could break a person's heart in a single glance. The year was when horses thundered faster than the reach of any message, when rivers carved the borders of tribes, and when each sunrise promised not peace but survival. It was not a time written by historians, nor shaped by rulers sitting in grand halls. It was a time lived in flesh and bone, written on faces hardened by sun, and sung in voices that rose with the fire each night. And it was in this world that two paths crossed paths so different they should never have met, yet bound by something deeper than choice. The man was of the earth itself, his skin painted with the dust of battles and the colors of his people. He carried the weight of generations in his stance, every scar etched not for pride but for memory. To his tribe he was a protector, a warrior, and one who bore the wisdom of ancestors, who still spoke through fire and smoke. His heart was not untouched, though. In his silence there lived grief, as if every breath he took carried both the hope of his people and the sorrow of what had been lost. The woman did not belong to this place, yet she stood with the same stubborn strength as those born upon these lands. Her hair, braided to keep from her face, told little of her story, but her eyes revealed a storm. She had seen her own people, torn from comfort, dragged into a wilderness that asked for more than most hearts could give. She did not come as conqueror, nor as guest. She came because fate had thrust her into the very heart of a world that neither welcomed nor forgave easily. She had learned quickly that survival demanded more than courage, it demanded sacrifice. Their meeting was not born from peace. It was a clash, the kind that sparks not from hatred but from misunderstanding too deep to untangle in a single glance. The night they first locked eyes, fires burned around them, not of celebration, but of destruction. The air was filled with the cries of the wounded, the smell of smoke, and the heavy truth that the world was tearing itself apart. Yet in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not mercy, not trust, but recognition. Each saw in the other a soul weathered by loss, standing alone in a world that took more than it gave. The tribe gathered in silence, their faces carved from stone, watching as the warrior stepped closer. His hand rose, not in threat, but in weight. Pressing against the woman's hair, as though anchoring her spirit to the ground they both stood upon. His voice was low, nearly swallowed by the wind, yet it carried the weight of an oath. She did not flinch. Though fear throbbed beneath her ribs, her eyes held steady, as though she had already lost too much to turn away now. Beyond them, the land pulsed with tension. Distant drums echoed against the canyon walls, calling both to battle and to remembrance. The river roared in the distance, swollen with the spring melt, and the sky darkened with a storm waiting to break. Somewhere in that gathering storm, a choice that would either bind these two lives together or tear them apart before they had a chance to know why fate had drawn them here. For this was not a tale of simple war, nor of easy friendship. It was a story of hearts pulled into the current of a river too strong to resist, where loyalty to one's people clashed against the unspoken truth of what it means to be human. And as the warrior's hand tightened, as the woman held his gaze with the strength of her own fire, the world itself seemed to pause. The moment balanced on a blade's edge, where one breath too heavy could shatter it all, and then, from beyond the circle of watching eyes, a cry tore through the night. A sound so sharp and urgent that every head turned, every body tensed. The fragile bond between them hung suspended like a single drop of rain before the storm. What that cry carried, neither yet knew. But they both felt it, the shift in the air, the weight of destiny pressing closer. Something was coming. It would demand more from them than either could yet imagine. The cry that tore through the night silenced even the wind. It was not the sound of battle, nor the howl of an animal. It was sharper, carrying the weight of something human, something that came from the depths of fear and urgency. The tribe turned their heads, their painted faces flickering in the firelight, eyes narrowing as if the darkness itself had spoken. The warrior's hand lingered against the woman's hair for a moment longer, grounding her in place before he pulled away. His jaw tightened, his gaze shifting toward the source of the sound. She followed his eyes, though her heart beat against her ribs with such force it was all she could hear. The camp erupted with movement. Shadows darted between tents, weapons lifted, voices whispered in low tones heavy with suspicion. The cry had not been one of their own. It was foreign, carrying an accent of another world, and that was enough to stir unease through the gathered people. The woman's chest tightened as she realized what it meant. Somewhere beyond the flames, someone else had stumbled too close. Another stranger? Another piece of trouble in a land already torn with wounds. She wanted to run, to find out who it was, but the weight of watchful eyes pinned her where she stood. The warrior gave no words, only a look that cut into her as if testing her spirit. It was not trust, but it was not rejection either. It was a silent question. Would she stand or falter when the world pressed down harder? The night stretched long, but sleep did not come for her. She sat by the edge of the fire, the smoke curling upward, stinging her eyes until they watered. The faces around her blurred into figures carved of wood and stone. Children pressed against their mothers, silent, their small hands gripping tightly as if they too felt the storm brewing. Every beat of the drum in the distance was like a pulse in her veins, a reminder that this place did not forgive weakness. Her thoughts drifted back to how she had come here, and though she tried to hold them back, the memories clawed forward. She had once lived in a place where fields rolled gentle, where the sound of cattle and the scent of bread baking spoke of safety. But that world was gone. It had been swallowed when wagons pushed further west, when promises of land turned into graves dug shallow in the earth. Illness had taken some, hunger had taken others, and those who survived found themselves strangers in a land that did not open its arms. She had buried more than she cared to count, and each grave weighed heavier on her than the one before. The warrior's world had its own scars. Though she had not been told his story, she could see it written in the way his people moved. They carried themselves with pride, but beneath that pride lived an unspoken ache. Too many of their young had not returned from hunting. Too many had been swallowed by conflicts that never ended. The land gave, but it also took, and every harvest was balanced by loss. Their songs by the fire carried voices that rose strong, yet the words bent with grief for what could not be reclaimed. The night after the cry, the woman woke before dawn to the sound of hooves striking earth. Riders had returned from the outer paths, their faces shadowed with worry. Murmurs rippled through the tribe, and though she could not understand every word, the meaning was clear enough. Strangers were close. The cry had not been a launet, had been a warning, perhaps a call, and more footsteps had been heard beyond the tree line. The people gathered their weapons, their faces painted with fresh marks, each symbol sharp against the skin. The warrior spoke to the others with authority. His voice steady, though beneath the steadiness lay urgency. He did not shout, yet every word cut through the morning like steel. The tribe listened, their nods carrying the weight of loyalty. But when his gaze flicked toward the woman, lingering just long enough for her to notice, she felt the shift again. Whatever was coming, it was not just a danger to them, it was a danger to her as well. She was not blind to how they looked at her. Some with suspicion, some with pity, and others with cold indifference. She was not one of them, and no matter how many fires she sat beside, no matter how many tasks she tried to share, she would always stand apart. Yet something in the warrior's gaze told her she was not entirely without place. She did not know why, and that unknowing made her restless. The days that followed were marked by tension so thick it clung to every movement. Scouts returned with signs of passage, broken branches, footprints pressed into the mud, ashes of fire still warm. Strangers were moving near, watching, waiting. The woman caught whispers of what might come: raids, battles, loss. But no one spoke openly in her presence. She was left with fragments, pieces of a puzzle that never came together, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. Yet in the quiet moments when the sun dipped low and painted the plains with gold, she found herself watching the warrior. He was relentless, training the young men, guiding the hunters, speaking with the elders whose voices carried the memory of generations. But when he stood alone, his shoulders bent ever so slightly, as though the weight of it all was his alone to bear. She wondered what ghosts haunted him, what names he whispered to the earth when no one listened. One evening, the air grew heavy with the scent of rain. He came to her. He said no words at first, only sat across the fire, his gaze steady, unblinking. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, carrying a warning that felt as much for himself as for her. The land was shifting, he said. Strangers had no place here. Not now, not when storms gathered. She listened, her throat tight, unable to answer. For she knew he was right. And then came the night when the drums changed. Their rhythm, once steady, grew urgent, pounding through the ground like the heart of the earth itself. The people rose quickly, gathering their children, preparing their weapons. The warrior's hand brushed the hilt of his blade, his eyes narrowing toward the horizon where faint lights flickered in the distance. The woman stood frozen, her breath caught. She knew in her bones that whatever waited beyond the darkness was not just danger for the tribe. It was tied to her somehow, to the path that had dragged her across endless miles to stand in this place at this very moment. She felt it in the way the wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke that was not from their fires. The cry that had shattered the first night returned to her ears, echoing again in her memory. It had not been random, not chance. It had been a signal. And as the drums pounded faster, as the warriors prepared to meet whatever approached, she realized with a sinking dread that her presence among them was no longer just accident. The storm broke overhead, lightning splitting the sky, rain falling in sudden sheets. The flames hissed, smoke rising thick. The warrior turned to her then, his face carved with determination. And for the first time, his eyes betrayed a flicker of something more than caution. She could not name it, but it bound her to him in that moment, as if the earth itself demanded it. And before she could draw breath, before she could speak the questions burning on her tongue, a shadow moved in the rain. Figures emerged from the darkness, their forms blurred by storm and distance, steps unhurried yet unyielding. The tribe stood ready. The woman's pulse roared in her ears. The warrior's blade gleamed in the lightning, and then, with a silence that cut deeper than any cry, the strangers came into view. Rain washed the strangers into shape. Their coats hung heavy, their hats tipped low to keep the storm from their eyes. Behind them, 2-pack mules staggered, burdened with crates marked in a merchant's careless hand. The tribe held the line, firelight catching on wet leather and polished wood. The warrior moved one step forward, and the strangers halted, as if the ground itself had ordered them to stop. For a heartbeat, everything waited. The air smelled of river water and wood smoke, of iron and wet earth. Then a man near the front raised both hands, palms open, and called out that they had lost the trail and had only come to seek shelter. His voice carried the twang of a trading post and the road. Old American vowels that had crossed too many miles. No one moved. The woman felt the pull of 2 worlds meet inside her chest. She could hear the lie buried in the stranger's tone. Shelter was not what they wanted. These were surveyors and freighters, men who measured land with cold eyes and then fed those measurements to others with hungrier mouths. She had traveled among their kind once. The words were always the same. We come in peace. We pay fair. We only need a little. A little became more. Then fences grew like thorn bushes. Then the ground itself went quiet, as if it had been silenced. She wanted to speak, to warn, but her throat refused her. The warrior asked the strangers where they were headed. The man with open hands offered a place name that did not belong to the river or the ridges. It belonged to a map and a ledger. Another man shifted, and the crates on the mules knocked together with a dull, secretive thud. The warrior's gaze cut to them, then to the woman. Again, that look. Again, the feeling that she was part of this, whether she wished it or not. The elders stepped forward at last. They were wrapped in cloaks beaded with rain, their faces lit from below by the wavering fire. They spoke not with fear, but with the gravity of those who remember far beyond one lifetime. Trade could be made, they said, but not now, and not near the children. The strangers would camp outside the line of willows, and would leave at dawn when the river calmed. The words were thin ice over deep water. Everyone in the circle could hear the unsaid, "Do not test us. Do not look at what is not yours." That night, the strangers lit their own small fire at the edge of the willows. The tribe posted watchers. The woman sat beside the coals of the main fire and listened to the old stories the elders told to. Keep fear from swallowing the young. They spoke of a time when the buffalo ran thick, when the sky moved with wings at dusk, when every stream had a name known by heart. They spoke also of a long trail of smoke in the distance that had once split the horizon and did not fade for many days. That smoke had come from a place where many wagons met. The elders said that when the smoke finally thinned, men arrived who did not ask which way the river flowed. They only asked how far. At the willow camp, voices rose and fell. On the wind came the clink of metal, the scrape of a pry bar. The warrior sent 2 scouts into the dark. They returned with faces like stone. The crates held a surveyor's kit, markers creased to a grid, and a rolled chart with lines that ran straight as a knife. There was also a sack marked with the stamp of a trading house in a new rail town. The sack held gifts meant to bind. Cheap knives, beads that looked bright but cracked under pressure, sweet liquor that burned hard but warmed the chest, coins with a face no one present respected. And at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, a letter with a seal. The warrior did not break it. He put it near the fire and watched the wax soften in the heat, till the shape blurred. Morning brought cold light and a fog that hugged the earth. The strangers rose early, as if they had not slept. The warrior walked to their fire with 2 other leaders and the woman trailing at a distance, torn between wanting to disappear and needing to know what thread had snared her. The man with open hands forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. He thanked them for safety and spoke of paying dues at the trading post up the river. He promised that his party would not cross sacred ground. Then he asked a question that sounded casual. Had anyone seen a lost traveler? A woman heading west with a small group. They had been separated 2 nights earlier when mules spooked on a ridge. The woman felt the world tilt, her breath cut short. The warrior did not turn, but she felt his attention land on her like the shadow of a hawk passing overhead. A lost traveler from the west. A group that had scattered. The cry that had torn the first night. The truth slid into place. The strangers had not stumbled here. They had followed a trail that led to her. There was a second story running below the first, winding like a root beneath the topsoil. Weeks back, before the woman had reached the river valley, she'd been part of a small wagon train that had swollen from scattered families and single riders. They had shared fires to keep coyotes away and shared stories to keep the mind steady. One evening, a quiet pair had joined the line. A man who said he drew maps, and a companion who kept accounts. They rode close to the woman, asking careful questions about river crossings and places where horses could drink. She had not trusted their soft talk, but suspicion was a poor blanket. When the storms came and the path grew mean, she had needed every set of eyes and hands. Then the ridge broke loose under rain. Mules cried out, the trail split, and she had never seen those 2 again. She had not looked back because the path ahead had demanded everything she had. Now the mapmaker's crew stood in the willow shade with the crates and the letter sealed in wax. They were searching for someone, and it was not a family member. It was information. It was proof. It was the living memory of this land that they could sell. The woman was not the only thread, but she was one they needed. The warrior read all of that in the way the open-handed man watched her while, pretending not to look. The tribe allowed the strangers to leave, because to hold them would spill into something the elders were not ready to declare. But the watchers followed. They tracked the surveyors south toward the ridge trail. That night, the watchers returned with news that the strangers had not left markers in the ground. They had buried them under a cairn near a split pine to collect later. The warriors in the circle responded with tight fists and a wall of silence. The elders spoke of counsel. The decision would not come fast. From this point, the conflict braided into many strands. One strand wound through the village itself. Younger hunters wanted to ride after the surveyors and scatter them like startled birds. Older voices argued for patience. The river was rising. Food had to be gathered before the next turn of weather. If the tribe wasted strength now, they would find themselves hungry when the first hard frost came. A third group argued for a path beyond fight or wait. They suggested sending a message to the distant fort, calling for a council with a traveling judge who spoke many languages. The judge was known to be stern but fair, and some said he valued treaties. Others muttered that courts were just new traps with smooth ropes, another strand tangled around the woman. Word spread that the strangers had spoken of a lost traveler from the west. Some of the tribe began to fear she was a lure, however unwilling. A mother whose child woke crying in the night asked the elders to send the woman away until the sky cleared. The healer, who had treated the woman's fever weeks earlier, said no. The healer argued that the woman had brought no sickness of intent, and intent mattered as much as any trail sign. But the healer's apprentices did not all agree. One had a brother missing from a hunt near the very ridge where the surveyors had camped. Pain drove hard thoughts. There was also a strand of wind-borne rumor about the rail town downriver. A new agent had taken charge, a man who had come from a coastal city where ships crowded a bay. He was said to be gathering claims like a magpie gathers bright things. He wanted to pin down the valley in lines and sell the space between those lines to people who had never seen the river or the canyon. The agent had hired guides without routes and sent them into the hills to measure distances written only in stories. The mapmaker who had ridden near the woman was likely his hand. If the agent succeeded, the tribe would wake one morning to find signs at the crossings and wires strung like spider silk between tall poles. The world would change, not in a roar, but in a long, hard pull that never let up. The warrior moved through all these currents without letting them sweep him away. He spoke with hunters, sat with elders, listened to mothers and two young ones who asked questions no one wished to answer. He also watched the woman, not because he distrusted her, but because he could see that all trails kept circling back to where she stood. He needed to know whether she would run if pressed or stand if asked. One evening, he asked her to walk with him to the overlook above the river. They climbed in silence. At the top, the valley spread below them, the water carrying the sky on its back. He asked her to tell him everything she remembered of the mapmaker and the companion. She told him about small details that had bothered her at the time and that now seemed loud. The way the mapmaker's eyes followed the land. It's not with the look of someone who loves a place, but with the look of someone who is cataloging a thing for sale. The way the companion kept moving beads on a cord, counting steps, and setting those counts into patterns. The small tin whistle that one of them used to call the mules with a two-note signal. The habit of circling a ridge before committing to the climb, as if testing the ground for hidden paths. The warrior nodded slowly. He said little. He only asked whether the woman would ride out with 2 scouts to find where the mapmaker had left the trail during the storm. The woman hesitated. Part of her wanted to curl back into the safety of the cook fires in the healer's hut. She knew fear would not protect what must be protected. She said yes. The decision felt like stepping into cold water. The ride south carried them along a game trail the tribe had used for generations. The scouts moved like smoke, speaking only when needed. They reached the split pine by dusk. The cairn was there, just as the watchers had said. The scouts lifted the top stones and pulled out 3 markers and a cloth roll. Inside the cloth were 5 narrow stakes, each carved with numbers and symbols not of this valley. The woman held one in her palm. The stake felt like a thread of winter in her hand, cold with the promise of future fences. They followed boot prints to a narrow pass where rock walls climbed high on either side. The scouts crouched, examining scuffed stone and the scrape of a mule's iron shoe. One scout pointed to a set of prints lighter than the rest, smaller feet. Maybe the companion. Maybe someone else entirely. The pass bent and then opened to a shelf with a view that could make a person forget danger. The woman did not forget. She spotted something caught between 2 shrubs. A strip of cloth the color of wheat before harvest, heavy with rain. She recognized the weave. It matched a shawl worn by a young person who had traveled beside the mapmaker for 3 days and had barely spoken. The young person had eyes like a bird trapped by a wire. Now this strip lay torn. There were signs of a quick camp made in haste and then kicked out to hide it. Night climbed the ridge fast. The scouts wanted to return before the dark locked the trail. As they turned, a sound drifted up from below. A 2-note whistle. Not loud. Not near. The scouts froze. The woman felt the same cold she had felt when holding the stake. The whistle came again, closer this time, followed by the gentle clatter of a bridle. Someone below was calling a mule with a signal the mapmaker had used. The scouts motioned for silence. They slid back along the shelf, keeping low. The woman followed, counting her own breaths to keep steady. Back at the village, the strands of conflict tightened. The elders had decided to send a runner to the distant fort, not to plead, but to lay down a marker of their own. They would call for a gathering where their voices would be heard beside others. The choice was risky. Some said it would draw attention that would strengthen the agent's hand. Others said only a public light could burn away a shadow as large as a valley map no one had consented to. The runner left at dawn with a pouch of tobacco, a polished stone as a token, and a message folded inside a piece of tanned hide. The healer watched the woman's return by firelight and saw the change in her face. No longer only fear. Now purpose had joined it, sharper than wind. The warrior took the stakes and markers and set them in front of the elders. He described the whistle and the cloth. The room fell quiet. A child sleeping near the wall stirred and pressed closer to a blanket. The healer set a kettle near the coals and kept her eyes on the steam. When the steam became steady, she spoke without looking up. There is someone out there who did not choose this path. If the mapmaker has a captive, then the land itself is in danger. Because a captive forces decisions that respect cannot reach. The words landed with a weight none could ignore. The council did not choose a raid. They chose something older and more dangerous than a quick strike. They decided to send 2 small groups. One would shadow the surveyors and learn where they gathered their caches and who met them in the hills. The other would search for the captive, not from above, where the pass exposed them, but through the lower ravine, where water carved a hidden way in spring. The woman asked to join the second group. The healer did not lift her eyes from the steam when she gave her blessing. The warrior did not argue. Before dawn, the woman wrapped her braid tight and smeared clay on her palms to cut the sting of the cold. The ravine path was slick with moss. Water whispered along the rocks, carrying the scent of cedar. The group moved in single file. They saw tracks of a small fire kept low, of a torn strap repaired hastily, of someone who was trying to move without leaving a trace and failing. The woman felt an ache growing under her sternum, a pressure that had no shape. The ache grew when they found a knot of twine tied in a pattern used by hunters to mark a safe turn. The pattern had been copied poorly. Someone had seen it once and tried to remember it. Someone who wanted to call for help without being obvious. The ravine widened and formed a shallow cove where sunlight pooled. There, they found a few strands of hair caught on a thorn and a dent in the soil where a knee had pressed hard. The warrior touched the ground and closed his eyes, reading what the earth would offer. He opened them a moment later and scanned the rim of the ravine. The woman followed his gaze and saw a thin curl of smoke rising beyond the ridge. She knew it was not the tribe's smoke. She knew also that the surveyors were not alone. The agent's hand had more fingers than anyone had counted. Back in the valley, the younger hunters sharpened arrows and checked the string of their bows, not because they had been ordered to fight, but because hands needed work when the heart waited. They watched the children play near the cook fires and told them stories of horses and rivers that laughed. The stories gave space for breath. Some of the women gathered herbs and placed them in bundles with prayer knots. Others mended blankets, stitching patterns that their mothers had taught them. The patterns sang of protection, of endurance, of the sun returning after long storms. By the 3rd day, the watcher group shadowing the surveyors sent word with a sign laid near a water crossing. The sign said that the strangers had met 2 riders cloaked in oilskin. Money had passed hands. A new map had been rolled and stowed. The group also reported that the surveyors kept speaking of a proof they would bring to the agent. A proof no judge could deny. They hinted at a witness. A voice they could claim as sample and seal. The message stirred the council into a second gathering that lasted until the stars were bright. What the council would decide next, no one could say. The runner's path to the fort was long. The captive, if there was one, might not have many nights to spare. The surveyors were building a web, and the tribe had only a short time to cut the first strands before the web tightened beyond any quick knife. The warrior stood alone at the edge of the camp, watching the line of the hills. He raised his palm and pressed his hand to the air as if feeling the shape of what pressed back from the dark. The woman stood a few paces away, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of cedar and smoke, and waited for the signal that would send her into the next stretch of the unknown. The ridge carried a silence that was heavier than any storm. Every tree seemed to listen. Every stone seemed to wait. The woman felt it in her chest as she moved with the small group through the ravine. The smoke they had seen earlier had grown into a thread of gray rising against the pale sky. It meant fire, and fire meant people. Each step forward was a step into a tightening circle. The warrior led, his eyes sharp as flint, his hand brushing the air now and then, as if reading the trail, not just with his sight, but with something older, something born into his blood. The ground grew rougher. Broken branches marked the path where someone had forced their way through. A mule had stumbled here. Its shoe had left a jagged print. The woman crouched and touched the mud. She felt how fresh it was, how little time had passed. Whoever they were following was close. The scouts exchanged glances that needed no words. They would reach the camp before the sun dropped. That meant they would find answers soon, whether they wanted them or not. Back at the valley, tension had built like a rope drawn tight. The elders sat through long hours of debate, their voices carrying across the fire. Younger hunters paced at the edge of the circle, hungry for action. Mothers soothed children with soft songs but could not hide the worry in their eyes. The healer prepared herbs and whispered prayers, knowing that no matter what choice was made, someone would carry wounds back. The people felt change pressing from all directions, and fear had become a shadow in every tent. The woman's group climbed out of the ravine as the smoke thickened. They crawled on their bellies the last stretch until the clearing opened below them. There, in the hollow, stood 3 of the strangers. 2 kept watch near the mules, while 1 bent low by the fire, and beside the fire sat a figure with wrists bound. The woman's heart hammered as she recognized the shawl. The captive was young, face pale, hair tangled with briar. She looked weak, but her eyes were alive, shifting, searching. It was the same person who had traveled briefly with the wagon train weeks before, the one who had kept to silence and shadows. The warrior's hand signaled stillness. The group watched. They listened. The fire popped, and one of the strangers muttered that the agent's men would be arriving soon. They spoke of proof, of payment, of land that would finally open once this valley was tied to ink and seal. The words cut sharper than knives. The woman knew then that the captive was not just a traveler. She was a piece of evidence, a living voice to twist into a claim. The tension climbed higher with every whispered word. The scouts wanted to strike fast, but the warrior held them back. He knew too well that one wrong move could end the life they had come to save. The woman felt torn between rushing forward and freezing in place. She could see the captive's chest rise and fall. Each breath might be her last chance. The sound of boots crunching on gravel drifted from the trail. Another group was arriving. More men stepped into the clearing, cloaked in oilskin, their faces shadowed. These were the riders who had met the surveyors earlier. Now they carried rifles slung across their shoulders. The woman's stomach twisted. This was no simple camp. It was a meeting point, a knot where all threads tied together. The agent's hand was moving pieces onto the board. The valley's fate was being written here in the firelight, and they were outnumbered. She could feel the scouts tensing beside her, arrows notched, ready. The warrior's eyes never left the captive. His silence held the group together like the last strand of a fraying rope down in the valley. Night had fallen, and the people gathered closer around their fires. Whispers spread that the watchers had sent no sign. Anxiety gnawed at the edges of patience. Some argued that waiting any longer would give the strangers time to bury more markers, to strengthen their hold. Others urged caution, fearing that charging blind would cost too many lives. The elders listened, but gave no decision. They were waiting for word from the warrior, though none could know what peril his group now faced. In the clearing, the men with rifles began unloading their packs. They pulled out parchment, ink, and a small box of coins. They spoke of signatures, of turning land into numbers. They spoke of the judge, who would not question their claim if they brought forward both map and witness. The woman's breath caught. They were preparing to move the captive at first light. Once she was carried to the fort, the land's story would be rewritten by men who had never walked its rivers or touched its stones. The warrior gave a small gesture. One scout slid away, disappearing into the dark to carry word back to the valley. The rest stayed hidden, watching the fire grow. The woman pressed her hand to the earth, as if trying to draw strength from it. Her thoughts raced. If they struck now, they might free the captive, but the rifles could cut them down. If they waited, reinforcements might come. Either path carried risk. The storm inside her chest echoed the storm inside the camp, where laughter rose sharp and cruel from men who thought victory already theirs. The captive moved slightly, just enough to shift the shawl. In the firelight, the woman saw her fingers twitch, shaping something small in the dirt. A symbol, a mark used among the tribe to say, "Hold on." The warrior noticed too. His jaw tightened. The captive was telling them she was still strong enough to endure, strong enough to wait for the right moment. That moment had not yet come. The hours stretched. The fire sank low, and the strangers took turns on watch. The woman could taste the weight of dawn before it came. Every scent sharpened. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made her pulse leap. She imagined the valley at that same hour, the people waking to another day of not knowing, the children asking why the hunters kept their bows so close, why mothers prayed longer than usual. The whole community was tied to the clearing, though they could not see it. Then a sound cut through the night. It was faint, distant, but clear enough. A runner's call. The scouts stiffened. The warrior's eyes flicked toward the hills. The agent's men heard it too. One of them muttered and stepped away from the fire, hand on his rifle. The call came again, closer now. The camp stirred. The captive sat straighter, eyes wide. The woman gripped the edge of her cloak, every muscle trembling. The night was breaking, not with dawn, but with a signal that all paths were about to collide. Back at the valley, the runner who had been sent to the fort was still many days away. The people did not yet know what storm brewed above them, but they felt it in their bones. The elders sat with hands clasped, staring into the fire as if waiting for the flames to show them what choice would come. The healer whispered to herself that the land was holding its breath. The younger hunters sharpened their knives until sparks jumped in the firelight. No one slept. No one dared. In the hills, the clearing had become a tinderbox. The woman watched as the strangers tightened their guard, scanning the dark, muttering about watchers and spies. The warrior pressed his palm to the ground once more. His stillness was a shield for the group, but even he could not stop the rush of events that was about to break over them. The woman knew with a clarity that chilled her that they were standing on the edge of the climax. All the strands, all the choices, all the fears had led here. The valley's fate hung in the space of a breath. The breath was almost spent. The captive's eyes lifted to the ridge where the woman crouched. For a heartbeat, the two of them held each other's gaze across the firelight and the shadows. It was not a plea. It was a promise. Whatever happened next, it would change everything. The sound of the runner's call echoed again, nearer, sharper, and then the camp erupted with movement. Rifles lifted, voices shouted, and the night itself seemed to shatter. The moment had come, though the outcome still lay hidden beyond the next heartbeat. The woman's hand tightened on the bough at her side. The warrior rose slowly from the brush, his figure cutting against the faint glow of the fire. The scouts followed, arrows ready. The clearing spun with voices, steel, and fire. Suspense twisted so tight it felt like the world might break under its own weight. The storm was here. The story had reached the edge of its highest cliff, and the fall had not yet begun. Top of form, bottom of form.